which is Tibetan for pay attention. Let's see, so we have a busy day today. We have, we're going to honor people who participated in the restoration of our steeple. We have some of the folks who actually did the work. We got some people in the town from commissions and whatnot. We have a number of certificates and all of that, so that's all headed your way. Here's a number of announcements. For those who are going to attend the No Kings rally, which I think is a great idea, it's next Saturday, and it's going to be at Institute Park, at 1 o'clock. It's not where it was last time in the square there in Worcester behind the town hall. It's at Institute Park. We also have a call out from our pastoral care people that Les is going in for surgery on Tuesday, so if people could help with meals, see Caroline, stand up Caroline, just not that people don't know. There you are, wave, there we go. She never listens. And we also have Trunk or Treat, which is coming up not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. We get behind a car, kids come, we're in costume, there's candy. If people would like to donate money or candy to the Trunk or Treat cause, also see Caroline there. Let's see, we have a number of folks from different district commissions. What else? Let's see, next week we're going to do a service on people's religious journeys, so people can share kind of how they came to be here. So I'm looking for volunteers for that. We have Annie in particular and Cindy on the Zoom, which is exciting. Say hello to them. Yay! We have other people, but we don't, they're special guests. We have this. They did leave after all. Let's not get too excited. No, I'm kidding. This fall and winter, we're going to have a women's history 5-part program, which is spearheaded by Kathleen. Do you want to just raise your hand? And anybody who's interested in being a part of kind of reinvigorating in a way, in a new style, some of the women's spirituality stuff that's gone on in here for 50 years. We'll hear about that. See her. On not this Friday, but the following Friday at the penultimate potluck, people are invited to come in costume. So if you want to come, that's the 24th, starts at 6 o'clock, Friday night, the 24th, no, not the 20th, yes, the 24th, come in costume for Halloween's if you'd like to do that. We're also going to start to do a book group, a little book read. I've got 5 books here. This is a protest history of the United States. We're going to do a group read through. I think when we figure out who wants to be a part of that, we'll figure out dates and times, but also see Kathleen if you're interested. I bought a bunch of books. You can come see me with money if you'd like. Wow, lots of stuff. What else? I think that's good. All right, here we go. Beautiful. You know you're good when you travel with two saxophones. Our chalice words come from Dale Hudson. It's titled In Remembrance and in Hope. This is a house of reflection and of contemplation, of joy and sorrow, friendship, sharing, and laughter. We light this chalice in remembrance of what we have been and in the hope of what we may become. Our opening words are very brief. Today's a busy day. Remembrance, the ringing of bells, the paying of tributes and thanks, the unveiling of songs, the reading of plaques, the distribution of certificates, and a walk through our church history, which has more than 22,000 days in it. I'm saving as many words as I possibly can. And I encourage you in that brevity to stand as you are willing and are able, stand in spirit, if not in body, for our opening hymn, number 114, Forward Through the Ages. 114. Just to get us started with awards and ceremonies, there's a couple pictures of Gordon, who was our church hero in this steeple, and it's back there. There's a couple cool shots. Just so you know, he was really our main guy, and among many other people, we thank him for doing that. Yeah, it's true. True. All right. And Gordon's such an egomaniac, he made me do that. Which, if anyone knows him, that is not true. There we go. So we have a number of certificates here to award to folks. I'm not exactly sure who's here. Celia's going to read these off to us, and if anyone is from this group, come forward. If not, we will certainly get it to you. And take it away, Prez.
Okay, certificate of appreciation presented to the Town of Northboro Community Preservation Committee. Is anyone here? With deep gratitude for your contribution to the First Parish Church Unitarian Universalist of Northboro's Steeple Restoration Project, October 12th, 2025, First Parish Governing Board.
I know the Preservation Committee was essential in us getting the funds to hire Valley Restoration, who is here today. Paul, would you stand up? Paul has steeplejack on his line. And Gordon and Paul work together, and we're grateful for them, and I hope you had the pleasure of coming up and seeing all your work. So we'll talk about your work later on. So here we go, Celia, take it away.
Okay, another certificate of appreciation presented to the Town of Northboro.
Yeah.
That means everybody. That means all the citizens. That means the Historic Commission, everyone. With deep gratitude for your contribution to the First Parish Church Unitarian Universalist of Northboro's Steeple Restoration Project, October 12th, 2025.
Essentially the taxpayers.
That's right.
That's right.
And
Here we go.
Julie,
Oh,
thank
come on
you.
up. Thank you, yeah.
Thank you very much. I had to bring her because she got the memo about the red clothing. So
That's right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Thanks so much for supporting us. All right. We also made a plaque, as this ceremony suggests we should. A lot of people listed on this plaque with deep appreciation and contributions from. Yeah.
And we can't tell you enough, everyone in this room and others that are not here, how appreciative and grateful we are for all of your part in any of this. Paul, you were up and down that creaky stairs, I know.
Yeah.
Again, October 12th, with deep appreciation for contributions from the Northboro Community Preservation Committee, the Historic District Commission, Northboro Historic Society, citizens of Northboro, and First Parish congregants. First Parish Building and Grounds Committee members. And this, would you all come up here, please, as I read your
Bob
name?
Light, come on up.
These are the people that were emptying the pools of water
Yep.
that were dripping.
Also our people, read the people from our,
Okay.
Gordon Hart,
Jean Cahill,
Gene Cahill,
Ed Harlow,
Donna Morris, Dave Sherman, Brian
Brian
Swanson.
Swanson.
Come on up, and we're going to have someone take a picture of us. Can somebody take a picture of us?
Absolutely.
Who's going to do
I
that?
think that-
Oh, Linda's going to do that. All right, let's come on up here. We get a better shot. We can tear ourselves. This
And-
won't take long. Come on up here. This will be tighter. Gene.
And these folks were years and years and years of trying to keep us dry.
Yes. I don't need to be above, but come on, Brian. Here, you hold this. You deserve it better than I do. All righty. Thank you all. Oh, we got prizes. We got little mementos. Paul, come on up here. Come on. We have mementos. We have little images of the church, and all those who participated in this get one of those because you can't take the plaque home. That's going to be on the wall. There we go. And, all right. Can we get one more picture with Paul, Lind? Here we go. I don't mean to be above everybody here, but anyway. Yeah. Celia, turn around. One more second there. Go ahead. we're almost done. All right. Okay, thank you all. No bunny ears, that's right. Thank you all. We normally have joys and concerns, and we traditionally in this church follow that with the song, Draw the Circle Wide. For those who are new to that, if you open up one of the gray hymnals in front of you, you can follow along, and we're going to sing our traditional, I don't know, soft, pastoral, sweet song called Draw the Circle Wide. Today is a great day to be at church because we do not have an offertory. So if you picked well, rarely, if you don't come, you picked correctly. So there we go. But I will tell a funny little story. There was, in the spirit of this couple, there was a couple who went to church all the time, and they were eventually asked by the pastor if they would want to be a pledging unit and would make a pledge, and they said, no, I have aging parents at home. They're expensive. I've got kids going to college. The wife essentially said, we've got new work done on the house. And he goes, and if we're not going to pay any of those bills, we're certainly not going to give any to the church. So we don't get to give in that spirit today, and Bob's going to play us our offertory words.
And the world's on its side, and time is running backwards, and so is the bride. Ring them bells, St. Peter, where the four winds blow. Ring them bells with an iron hand so the people will know. Oh, it's rush hour now on the wheel and the plow, and the sun is going down upon sacred cow. Ring them bells, sweet Martha, for the poor man's son. Ring them bells so the world will know that God is one, and the shepherd is asleep where the willows will weep, and the mountains are filled with lost sheep. Ring them bells for the blind and the deaf. Ring them bells for all of those who are left. Ring them bells for the chosen few who'll judge the many when the game is through. Ring them bells for the time that flies, for the child that cries when innocence dies. Ring them bells, St. Catherine, from the top of the room. Ring them bells from the fortress for the lilies that bloom, for the lines they are long, and the fighting is strong, and they're breaking down the distance between right and wrong.
Want to go up in the pulpit? Okay.
I'm already set up here.
All right.
No, I'm not that high nor mighty to be up there. Today's reading is from Theodore Parker's installation. This reading is taken in large part from the sermon Theodore Parker preached here at his own installation as minister 178 years ago in 1846. Well, that's a long time even for me. That date is important and chosen because it is exactly a full century after our church was brought to life by 10 inspired Westboro folks. Parker said in words that could have been written yesterday, "This church is to lead this century. The church that is to lead this century will not be a church creeping on all fours, its face turned down, its eyes turned back. It must be full of the brave spirit of the day, keeping also to the good of times past. This marvelous age demands of us, as never before, freedom for itself, usefulness in its institutions, truth in its teachings, and beauty in its deeds. If the church is to be true, many things which seem great gainful in the street and expedient in the Senate House will be set down as wrong. If there be a public ill in the land, if a lie invades the state, it is for the church to give alarm. Is the church to do nothing, to say nothing? Let us have a church for the whole person, truth for the mind, good work for the hands, love for the heart, which, like the lightning in the clouds, shines the brightest where everywhere else it is the most dark." Amen.
Thank you. Theodore Parker preached at what you might think of as the Orpheum in Boston to sometimes 3,000 people. He often preached with a gun in the pulpit to make sure that no fugitive slaves could be taken from church and taken back into slavery, and we share that with that spirit.
Where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves
That was beautiful. I need some tissues up here. Before we begin a march through the history of notable events and accounts of the tenures of ministers and when or this or that in the building happened, I want to pause in reverence to the value and virtue of loyalty and commitment that can, when cultivated, live inside of us. Although many in the church choose to bow their heads to God, some of us some of the time, some of us all the time, nearly all of us are paused in our tracks when struck with the impact of the way principles and values and virtues can live inside of people. In that spirit, I encourage you to, before we march through this history, to think about the endless numbers of unnamed, unsung people that really kept this church going. Let's pause for just a sober moment. They'll never be mentioned. That for nearly 300 years, parishioners in all varieties of clothing, for 12 generations, have done whatever it took for us to be here today. True of every church. Okay. Today I'm going to use the excuse that not all of you know the history of this beautiful church of ours, with its newly restored steeple, as my reason to work a few finely crafted existing histories. Taking time to craft a sermon in my own terms is my effort to fully digest a place that I've come to love over the last 15 months or so. And I choose to explain this history as something a blessing meets tribute to the people that have made it happen. Aware that for a year and a quarter I've been here, I've experienced roughly 1% of the time we have been a church. Over 22,000 days of churching have gone on here. And given that the sermon shouldn't be much more than 15 minutes, I better get going. I'm going to start with a baseline of what I know without doing any research. This won't take long. These are essentially the historical highlights. I want you to encourage you to consider the next 50 seconds or so crib notes for the upcoming coffee hour. You can drop them as if you were paying attention. The first thing to know is that we are really the first public institution in town. In fact, the church even precedes the establishment of the town by 2 decades, 21 years. Did you know that? All right, there you go. Also on the short list of historical tidbits is the fact that we had an amazing early pastor named Peter Whitney, who also has a parsonage named down the street for him. And this noble and incredibly impractical man is remembered for 2 moments. The first being that he inspired soldiers to, on the first day of the Revolutionary War, go off and fight. The second being for choosing to finish his sermon one Sunday morning while his house was on fire. I wouldn't do that. You might also want to know that early in our history, the first generation of settlers and church members experienced the tragic death of an ungodly number of young kids to a deadly coughing infection. This is all stuff I knew before, so I wrote it down. I also knew something that one of our early ministers cultivated a strong intellectual tradition here in Northboro that we're trying to reinvigorate with lyceums and such. And that featured top speakers like abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And as you know, in the middle of the last century, the church burned down and was famously on the cover of Life magazine. There's pictures of that around. Kathleen and Ed put up our history that is also in a PowerPoint, so a little bit of thanks to them. Tough to cover Ted Lilly, but that's our history, and you can take a look at it as well. More recently on the What You Should Know list, where I started, is over the last 50 years, we have a strong, active women's spirituality movement, a recent history of female ministers, and a disturbing, weird abuse of power that likely created some trauma in people and ended a very successful former minister's career. And that we also have, who's coming back in April, a beloved minister emeritus who brought us a little bit of a Buddhist flair back about 10, 15 years ago. I'll touch on some of those. But that's what I knew before digging in. Without knowing more about our specific history, I know this. If we're going to do history true, and not the whitewash way the present administration would wish we would, it must be said that long before Paul Revere ever whacked a bell or a piece of silver, the native nipmunks were here until we barged in and took over. Starting somewhere between 10 to 15,000 years ago and ending somewhere about 350 years ago, this land was exclusively occupied and no doubt, with a no doubt ever-shifting group of native peoples identifiable at last as being the Nipmuc. And that means that to tell our history fully, we have to say that those who built the church behaved not only with fortitude and foresight and courage, which they certainly did, God bless them, we wouldn't be here without them, but they also behaved with some hubris and entitled attitude that way too often has been part of Christian church history, and nothing like Jesus. We should be grateful and pay tribute to those forebears. Being a settler was truly hard, as we will hear. Being a native was harder. And unless and until we remember that all humans are inclined to find good excuses to do whatever we want to do or take whatever we want from one another, we will continue to do that. Mini sermon within a sermon over. What most of us consider our history begins here. What we know and love as First Parish Church, Unitarian Universalist, however you describe it, officially began on May 21st, 1746. It was organized under the name the Church of Christ. And that, as you will hear again, because I like to brag about us, took place more than 20 years before the incorporation of the town itself. The grand task of starting a new church or meeting house is reported to have been initiated by as few as 10 families in the area. We were originally designated to be the North Precinct of Westboro, and our church both foreshadowed and provided the primary validation for Northboro even becoming a town. Back in colonial America, everyone knew that the existence of a new church or meeting house was essentially the first step in getting an independent town started. The desire of those in the North Precinct of Westboro, which is kind of interesting to say, was bad news for the Westboro folks. The town had only been independent for 49 years itself, and after those in the North Precinct left to become Northboro or attempt to become Northboro, Westboro had only 89 families left. The eventual separation pulled 1/3 of its residents away. Looking back, we do have to remember all along that our spiritual ancestors were dealing with constant life and death issues that we likely don't. We should not envy them as much as we revere them. We as a church were part of a fast-paced expansion effort that literally began the moment we stepped on Plymouth Rock. To summarize that journey just from the coast to here, Northboro was until 1766 originally part of Westboro. Westboro was until 1717 originally part of Marlborough. Marlborough was until 1660 originally a part of Sudbury, and Sudbury was itself incorporated in 1638, 18 years after the Pilgrims stepped off the Mayflower. I think sometimes we forget how fast mostly English settlements expanded. The particular split that made us who we are took place in the 1740s mostly because about 25 families had come to living here, being 4 miles from the center of town in the Westboro meeting house, felt like it was just a little too far to regularly travel back. They left because of their commute. And after going to meeting, or church as we call it, was back in the day, let's just say, strongly encouraged, and the nearly mandatory trip was often done, as you might imagine, on foot, on horseback, or in a wagon, and often needed to be done more than once a week. The 1740s was, of course, sadly, a little bit before Kathleen and Ed Howland got around to hosting a jazz festival that promoted solar panels and electric cars. But you know what they say? Timing is everything. However, although the commute between the villages of Westboro and the settlement around here was a problem, so were the logistics of establishing a town on the frontier. There were rules that governed the establishment of towns that traced back to England. To meet the criteria of being a legitimate town like ours, settlers had to prove they could support a church, basically was also the meeting house, provide for that person's salary, and afford the cost of maintaining that building. Essentially, in order to earn the distinction of being a town, people needed to have the capacity to support a church. The ability to support a meeting house was not some contrived hurdle, however, set up by some bureaucracy. Back in the day, the meeting house served as the religious, political, business center of life. That was absolutely true here. For roughly the first 75 years, the town and the church shared the only public building. Crazy. It's hard for us to imagine how obvious and essential it would have been back there to merge the church and the town out on the effort, because what were called towns were really very small, vulnerable settlements, right? There were at times angry natives, there was disease everywhere. So in 1744, when the locals in what was Westboro's North District, as I've said, gathered to vote on whether they were committed enough to building a meeting house, it was a big decision. They voted yes, and attached to that bold appropriation of 50 British pounds for the construction of it. I'm not sure where that money came from. There, after all, were no dollars yet. We, of course, were not even a country yet, but they dedicated 15 British pounds for the construction of the church. It's an interesting number, given that 50 pounds is almost the exact amount Celia steals each week from the collection plate for what she tells me she calls her presidential discretionary fund. I'm kidding, of course. Celia stopped doing that months ago. I also know that the people who would agree to build a church for 50 pounds were nowhere to be found during the time we were looking for people to work on the steeple. No offense, Paul. Jokes aside, $50 allowed the cost of the building in the meeting house and the residents of the North District of Westboro to get busy building. However, deciding where to put the meeting house was a bit of a debate, and they called in a sort of a mediated group of people, 3 captains actually, one from Worcester, one from Sudbury, one from Shrewsbury, to pick the spot, and they picked here, or very close to here. A year later, in 1745, the first version of our meeting house was built. I want you to imagine the day that the church was first built by envisioning something like an Amish barn raising. That seems like, in the way the book writes it, it's what it would look like. I want you to read like Amish barn raising, where cider, likely hard cider, was served. And rewarding people back in the day to help build by providing them alcohol was a common tradition in colonial America. Not a bad idea. I think it's hard for us to imagine how isolated and independent our ancestors were, because when you pause to think about it, when it was shocking for me to think that it was a barn-raising kind of event, who else besides the very local people would be there to build the building? Answer: there was no valley restoration back then. I think I speak for us in the church, and all of us in the town, and everything would just see how grateful we really are that we were the generation that didn't have to fix the steeple ourselves. I want you to imagine for just a moment members of this church climbing out and around the steeple to fix it. No, don't do that. I don't even want to do that. So we at First Parish offer the town the most primitive thanks for helping us find the steeple and keeping us from climbing way too high for what was safe. I mean, we got a great Buildings and Grounds committee we're all grateful for. They've emptied kiddie pools full of water. They've done tons of things, but they're not necessarily a high wire act. Although we now identify as being a UU church as much as we identify as being First Parish, I think for most of us, it's important to remember that when the town was founded, Massachusetts was still basically a theocracy. We came to be when Puritan leaders still imposed their religious views on everyone and used the colonial powers of government to do so. Back then, one's personal religious beliefs were presumed, and one's attendance at church was nearly mandatory. They didn't have theological discussion groups like we do, where people were allowed full flower of their own opinion. They did not have music directors that emailed the minister that we should sing a silly Monty Python song at the offertory, or ministers who enthusiastically over email said, "Yeah, do it." Independent, self-governing churches that were inextricably tied to the local government was how this country, at least on the East Coast, began. Ironically, we were born in the same kind of theocracy many in this room fear the return to. Ironic. In full disclosure, I too have been trying to reinstitute a theocracy of my own, but the women who really run the church won't come to the meetings. Over time, of course, as more and more different people started to enter into the U.S., the church and state thing seemed to be essential. However, but when we met, that was a century away. When we first gathered, that was almost a century away. Like nearly all New England churches, ours was born with a congregational independence born of the Mayflower Compact. Congregational polity, which governs us, independent churches, is a form of governance offered by Baptists and Congregationalists and all those truly non-denominational churches. However, back in the day, that was a novelty. That differed from England's mandated forms of worship, where electing your own minister didn't happen and they were brought in from a distant authority. That distinction mattered. And it facilitated towns coming up with their own characteristics and churches and their groups coming up with their own cultures. The crop yields were set by ministers at that time. Local laws were implemented in large part by the ministers. Our early ministers were lucky. We were lucky to get them. They were important and talented. The first 3 ministers of the church covered the first 131 years of our life together. The second and third ministers of the church, Peter Whitney and Joseph Allen, served the church for a continuous period of 106 years, an era that spanned the time from the American Revolution into and through the Civil War. When our church meeting house was built, most of this area was nearly woodlands. Down the hill in the direction I'm facing was a swamp, and then it became a meadow. We've been here so long. The land that this church sits on was donated by a Captain James Eager, who inevitably had been granting the rights to it by, at least from a distance, the power of a king who had never been here. So, thanks. The Nipmunks really owe us the thanks. And it started, the first iteration of the church was raised on a spring day in 1745, but from that day was steadily sort of improved upon. I love to imagine just Donna and Carolyn here, who are here all the time, with some frilly colonial things on, working on the building. Can't you see that? They'd be great, amazing church members in any generation. Although when the church first started, the pulpit was filled by guest ministers from other towns, it really wasn't very long before John Martin agreed to be the first minister. Due to some theological discrepancies about his biblical interpretation of who and how Christians entered the afterlife, he wasn't immediately accepted. That got ironed out. But with the letter of acceptance that he wrote in 1746, it was so filled with God talk that anyone reading it today would have to think he was accepting a job somewhere else. Back then, it must be said, though, that everyone was a Christian, or certainly knew enough to shut up about the ways that they weren't. Reverend Martin would serve as our minister for 21 years, 1746 to 1767, basically all the years that we were officially not a town yet. These very early years of the church were a struggle. There wasn't enough money. We were basically a frontier. Money was tight everywhere. Northboro was a frontier town with a slowing growing number of families that likely a long time into his ministry still only had less than 100 people here, 100 families here. Early on, things were hard. During the winter of 1749 to 50, they got worse, as I said. 3 years into the church's life, tragedy struck, and 60 children died of an epidemic dubbed throat distemper. Throat distemper. 60 kids. Reverend Martin was an essentially stabilizing force in the first couple decades of the church in the town. He died in 1767. Within just a few months, Reverend Martin, the more famous of all of them, he became the minister, and that was just a decade before the Revolutionary War. And he was the reverend until 1816, 48 years. This was a time of big colonial families, and Whitney was a man of his times. He and his wife, she obviously doing most of that hard work, literally, in that department, had 11 children. Those 11 children would march into church according to their age and fill up the first couple pews of the church. Although the story reads in Northboro that we were strongly pro-independent and patriotic, pro-Revolutionary War, there had to be tensions in that time about the degree to which our church should, could, and should be politically or would be politically active and outspoken, just like today. There was no way that Whitney's early years were not filled with brewing controversy the colonies were having with England. Regardless, whatever level of tension there was, Whitney shared a glowing indignation that many in the public had for being controlled by England, and the record suggests he preached rebellion in the spirit of Old Testament prophets. No kings was apparently as much or more even then a rallying cry from the pulpit as it is today. He most famously did that thing on April 19th when many of the local men assembled to hear an address from him, and news of the events in Lexington and Concord arrived, and at that time he gave them a benediction and off to fight they went. People say nothing ever happens at church. In Northboro, patriotic zeal was not a one-off adventure, though. Northboro reportedly always raised enough of its quota of soldiers for the Revolutionary War, and Whitney's eloquent and fiery speeching kept the town on pace. During the war, there were times when those who supported the Loyalists were basically detained or constrained to their own farms. Things proceeded through the town through his tenure, and the town grew. For the years from 1870 to 1924, that little spot over there just through the trees where a couple people are parked was the high school. And by 1794, the original meeting house had begun to fall into disrepair, and they voted on it to be repaired. Those repairs never happened. They instead declined those repairs and planned to build a new building, which didn't happen for another 16 years. The expected costs of that building were $500. It cost far more than that. The estimated expenses didn't take into account inflation and an ever-increasing list of modifications that people wanted that made our second meeting house larger, fancier than the first one was, and it was in large part that structure that we live in today. This is a duplicate of that place. Although many believe that the designer of that church was a famous architect named Bulfinch, there are many reasons to believe that it was also could have been done by a man named Ames, spelled A-E-M-S and E-M-S. He could also be responsible. Since the original plans are no longer in existence, there's a mystery that will never be solved. Bulfinch, though, developed graceful belfries like ours, and First Parish Church has always been considered a 19th century gem of American church architecture. At the time the new church was being built, the original building had collectively served us for 65 years. It was taken down and eventually built into a barn that was put up in Westboro. Sadly, the erecting of the steeple did take the life of a local young man named Horace Perkins at 18 years of age, and during the construction, he fell to his death. Let's pause for just a moment of silence, just a small moment, 200 years too late for that young man. Beautiful things sometimes cost. Although the church was completed in 1809, during the last decade of Whitney's ministry, the inside of the church underwent constant changes that I find hard to follow. That was particularly true in those first 50 years. Most of the changes took place after Whitney's departure, and Reverend Allen was the pastor. As noted, Whitney served the church, which was still then named the Church of Christ, for 48 years. I might be projecting, but I suspect that he kept his post all the way into 1816 as an old man as the best excuse not to be home with his 11 kids. Remarkably, though, almost unbelievably, Whitney was followed by a minister who stayed longer. Reverend Allen doesn't have the well-known parsonage name for him like Whitney does, but he was an important guide in the years. He served for 61 years, 1816 to 1876. He turned out to be a real advocate for education in the whole town. He started lyceums. He built fostered to life more than one library before the town had the resources to take on that job. Reverend Allen would make Northboro a place during the 19th century that people came to think of as wicked smart. He was a big gardener too, which I also know carries some weight around here. He saw the transition from our church from being the only church in town to a Unitarian church, which it was named, in 1832. He was our minister when in 1821 the town offices moved out of the building. It was during his long run of religious controversies in the early 1800s that things came to a head. In 1827, he was here when a group of parishioners left to form the Baptist Church. This was a time when some of the earliest religious diversity in America was really taking place. And then in 1832, a smaller conservative faction withdrew from our generally liberal church, a more liberal church, and organized the Evangelical Congregational Church. During his time, we changed the name and dropped the Church of Christ and added the Unitarian part to it. Up until 1832, we were the only game in town. It was only after the birth of a Baptist and an Evangelical Congregational church in town that we first started to be referred to as First Parish. After all, you need a second parish to call something First Parish. The more liberal group, which we claim to be our ancestors, was in the majority during these religious changes and thus retained the property and the congregation in the building. It should be noted that local events beyond this was the time when Congregationalists and Unitarians split. Up to about 1825, when American Unitarianism officially began with the creation of the American Unitarian Association, mostly each suburban town had only one church, and that church building was the center of all activities. The population didn't warrant it. There wasn't quite enough religious diversity. The legacy of so many present UU churches in this area, having been the centerpiece of their early town life, are as common here in Eastern Mass as mud is in March. But I still think it's cool. I honestly sometimes choke up and chuckle at the thought that our uber-tolerant theological UU home are the direct legacy of the Mayflower Pilgrims. I love the history of that. I love the irony of that. As the history of Northboro tells it, with town offices now out of the building and our identity as a Unitarian church secure, we began to remodel our relatively new sanctuary. We built a vestry under the town hall, and in 1837 changed the pulpit and its location. I don't know where they were. I don't understand that. However, we're not done. A decade later, in 1847, there were more changes involving not only more pulpits, but our steeple got a clock for the first time, which was called the town clock. And in 1851, an organ was, for the first time, I believe, installed. You can feel the modern world entering the building, can't you? If you're struggling to grasp the evolution of the physical changes that took place in the building, I am absolutely with you. In summary, 1809, we built the first meeting house. That underwent significant transformations. And inside, too much to follow. However, none of the changes were as significant as what happened in the 3 days before Christmas in 1945. And if you know anything about our church's history, you would right about now be grasping that I'm talking about the fire that engulfed and destroyed our church mid-century, right after the war. Destroyed. Only the bell outside comfortably remained from that time. Parishioners and townfolk banded together, as they did to restore our steeple, to rebuild it almost entirely as it was, slightly smaller footprint, actually. The parish house at that time, which is that building over there to any visitors, where we will soon have refreshments once I shut up, which will be soon, which is originally a surplus Army chapel that was purchased after the war in '47 from the government. That building was moved up from Bradley Field in Connecticut up here, and with a few little adaptations and a foundation put under it, is where it sits today. Both the new building and our parish hall were dedicated on June 27th, 1948, not too long ago. The same day the cornerstone of the third church, that one we sit on now and live in, was laid there right next to the second one. We've reached the point where I don't have the details or the time to get into the culture of what was going on. Here's what we're doing now. We host Sai Baba, a Hindu-based community and a tradition dedicated to a Hindu guru. We host a local Montessori school. We have a collection of women, many in the long history of doing feminine-focused religious practices and pagan solstice-style rituals. There is a group of what they call nitwits, I'm not calling them nitwits, who is a sewing, crocheting group. There's a men's group. We host a successful Memorial Day fair. We meet monthly to discuss theology. We stand up for democracy in a weekly protest. Today there remains a long-standing poetry group. We now offer a spiritual memoir kind of writing group. We have open mic nights. We have a new Meeting House Art Center organization that lives under the umbrella of our walls. We have, and each month we have every other month we have impressive concerts, potlucks, all of that. We have an active cooperative relationship with two indivisible groups that we rent to, we rent to also people who love orchids. We host an annual ecology-themed, sun-worshipping, jazzy electric car music afternoon. So this is the era of political witness, open mic nights, in a time where all civic groups are struggling to compete against a world driven by market and technological forces and change that allow us more independence than might be good for us. Unitarians and Americans and this church grew up in a time when the church first merged, Christian thinking first merged with Enlightenment thinking and political self-determination. Essentially, our country and our faith grew up together. Know that had our founding fathers and mothers been born just 2 generations later, they would have been Unitarians too. I think as we wonder what our country is up to, we realize that we embody much of the basis and basic great things of what America is and aspires to. And if that thought inspires you, you belong here. End of sermon. Amen. And now, we have a tribute to the bell. The bell up in our steeple and the bell that sits outside with that bold rustic necklace of wood and metal spikes. The one outside was cast in 1809 at Paul Revere's foundry. Up to the fire that brought it to the ground in 1945, that bell with a cool Liberty Bell crack in it if you sit on the bench, rung out the death of every president up to FDR. Think about that. That bell rung out the death of every president up to Roosevelt. But it couldn't stand the water during the fire brought it to the ground. And now we restore our tradition of playing with the bell with this song, which has some special features in it. Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Our hymn is a question many fundamentalists have asked about us. It's number 113, Where is our holy church? 113. Our closing words are a responsive reading. They're 576 in your hymnal. Please join me. It's titled A Litany of Restoration. If recognizing the interdependence of all life, we strive to build community, the strength we gather will be our salvation. If you are black and I am white, if you are female and I am male, if you are older and I am younger, if you are progressive and I am conservative, if you are straight and I am gay, if you are Christian and I am Jewish, if we join spirits as brothers and sisters, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened, and that does matter. Amen. Two pros. Please join us for reception over in the Parish Hall. Great. That was good. Yeah. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Must be Gail.
Thank you. That was great. You look like such a mad scientist in the last few songs. It's great.
Great.
Cool. Yeah.
For a while now.